So I'm going to get started now. Hi, everyone. My name is Chisom Udeze. I am Nigerian by way of America and the world, and recently a naturalized Norwegian citizen, which is exciting. I am an economist and DEI practitioner, and also the founder of Diversify, the organization behind this initiative. I'm really excited to be here and to learn from this amazing panelists that I so respect and admire. So for this description of myself, I am a Black woman. I have curly Black hair down my shoulders. I'm wearing a colorful earring from South Africa. I have a roundish face and wearing a turtlenecky off-white sweater, and my backdrop is a boring white background. So that's me. I'm gonna call on the next person on my screen to introduce themselves. And Nikolai, that would be you.
Hi everyone, I am Nikolai, CEO of the agency Eros. It means we are us in English. We work with consulting, education. I've just started with recruitment as well. We have offices here in Oslo, in Norway, but we work with clients from country. I have a Danish background with my parents coming from Denmark, but I am raised here in Norway. I also have a master's degree in diversity, and I have for the last couple of years been working with social entrepreneurship as well as an diversity consultant. To describe myself, I have blonde hair. It's not bleached and it's dragged to the right side. I have a darker beard and I am, per definition, a white male. I'm wearing a dark blue t-shirt and beige overshirt. Behind me, there is an off-white wall and the roof is pretty white. Really looking forward to this chat and to learn more the other podcasts.
Thanks, Nikolai. Nicole, you're up.
Hello, everyone. It's so fun to always have a Nikolai and Nicole. I always get really tense. Well, hello. My name is Nicole Cavender. Super excited to be here. I am born and raised in Stockholm, Sweden. And I have both Ugandan and Finnish heritage as well. So I identify as a Black or mixed woman. And who am I? I am co-founder of All of Us, where we basically champion diversity and inclusion in the creative industries here in Sweden. So we both work with, or as consultants, basically, helping companies truly put diversity and inclusion at the core of their business. That's a main purpose for us, but also to be a bridge between networks and really accelerate the actual integration and open up doors for minorities of any background in Sweden. So we have a network where we've gathered people of color who all are professionals working in the creative industries, and we help to accelerate this change by not just educating and advocating the topic, but also having recruitment agencies specializing in diverse and inclusive recruitment processes, but also through a mentorship program where we have very established people in power in the creative industries who are mentors for 1 year to young professionals who really want to make their way in. So that's a big part of what we do. I do lots of other things as well. I have a podcast called Checkpoint, where myself and two friends talk about what it's like being Black in Sweden. It's in Swedish, unfortunately, but for those of us in Sweden, feel free to listen. I'm also course director at Barry School of Communication in Strategic Communication. So my core skills in the end is being a business director and a strategist. And my background is very much from the agency side, being a consultant. Like I said before, I am a Black woman. I am more on the light skin side. For those of you who can't see me, I also have curly hair. It's still short though, so it's kind of down to my ears now. It's growing, but I did the big chop last year to kind of get going. I'm wearing it's looking like black, but it is dark blue, polo sweater. I'm going all Steve Jobs today. Sitting in my home office with it is mostly white background, but I do have a lovely palm tree behind me and like a nice lamp. So it's looking super profesh, and yeah, very excited to be here today and talking to these wonderful people.
Thanks, Nicole. Camilla, you're up.
Hi everyone, Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon, hyvää ilta, no hyvää päivää. I want to also say thanks for having me, and I'm here from Helsinki, and I'm based in Helsinki for 8 years now, but I'm born and raised in Uzbekistan and have lived for 12 years in Denmark. So I see myself, Nordic Edge, Central Asian representative. I work in diversity inclusion, public speaker, event host, and mentor. I serve business community and immigrant community here across Finland, and during last 4 years, I run my own consulting. Before that, I had a sales career in Scandinavian shipping companies, including Maersk Line. So for me, Finland connection was through trading containers from south to north, different ports in Finland. And then I settled down here with a spouse, and now in hibernation on parental leave. So thanks to these opportunities, it's actually nice as a young mother to be in touch with what's going on in the market, and these hybrid events can keep me up on track and not have that FOMO. So last projects I've been part of with Helsinki employer branding, Helsinki region, and for me, my community was international students and universities, cities, and NGOs and trade unions. So for me, diversity inclusion is where I work with. Is a lot about cross-sectoral collaboration, and I do celebrate volunteering, mentoring, and social entrepreneurship. What I also have done before is a lot of nonprofit activities. I work with Crown Prince of Norway organization, Global Dignity, and in Helsinki, we reached around 5,000 young people to aspire to their careers. And a lot of times it is for young people from different ethnic backgrounds. So it's about aspiring to careers and feeling them valuable and worthy. So I do celebrate what everyone do. And it's really important right now to think after COVID, how this whole ethnic dimension really comes out in regards to war in Ukraine and women as well. So look forward to this conversation.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't say what I'm wearing.
Yeah. Can you describe?
I'm sorry. Yeah. So I'm Central Asian. I'm wearing a colorful shirt under a pink shirt, and I have black hair. What did you say, Nicole? Light skinned. And in the background is an OD library, the best library in the world, located in Helsinki. And yeah, that's about it.
Thanks, Camilla. Helena, you're up.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. It's so nice to see all of you. Well, I'm Helena, based out of Copenhagen. I normally introduce myself, and I think Shizom and Diversify also wrote this on LinkedIn, that I am Isaac's mother. He's turning 6 in September. Then I'm also Veronica and Jessica's leader. Veronica is on this call, but Jessica is holidaying actually at the moment, lucky her. Lastly but not leastly, I am Nana and Katrina's best friend, and then I'm also Lisa and Finn's daughter. It says something about me as a human being. I'm also a human being who's very, very excited to go to Roskilde Festival in Denmark, coming up in about a month or so. It's been 2 years since I was last down there due to the pandemic, so I'm missing those 4 days where you're allowed to do everything and nobody will ever brag or tell about it. So that's coming up also. At the end of the day, Isaac was actually one of the reasons why I ventured out back in 2019 and founded Diversity Factor, which is your typical management consultant agency, just focused solely on diversity and inclusion. It takes a village, as I think all of these in the Zoom boxes know. So I'm so lucky that I have 3 brilliant minds working alongside me, doing consultancy for basically your standard typical corporate organizations who are like, what is diversity and inclusion? Why do we need to do that? Don't we have equality in Denmark? So what we strive to do is to help them create a more inclusive working environment where diversity then actually can thrive. So we focus much more on the culture and the equity level of the organizations, thereby hoping and crossing our fingers, but also believing that diversity will come more organically from there on out. I am sitting here as a white woman. I probably look a little bit reddish, typical Scandinavian who was out in the sun during the weekend and probably didn't put on as much sunblock as she should have. I have dark brown hair. I'm sitting in a black shirt. My background is the logo of my company saying diversity factor, or if I switch my head around, you can see the full brand name. It's on a white logo on a grayish background. Yeah, I think that's me. Nice to see you all.
Thanks, Helen. And Charlotte.
Hey everyone, my name is Charlotte Beering and I am calling in from Iceland today. So I have been working at an organization called Measurable for the last year and a bit. Measurable is a food processing company primarily focusing on primary and secondary. And so it's an interesting mix of manufacturing, engineering, and technology. So 3 industries, which, as you probably know, are not the most diverse. So they brought me in just over a year ago to support them on their diversity and inclusion. And it's been a really amazing journey to almost come in with not quite a blank piece of paper, but a lot of influence in how we build things. So I've really started focusing on how we're building the foundation for diversity and inclusion at the organization. My background is quite varied. As you can hear, I sound quite British, but I was born in South Africa and I've lived in 9 different countries. So I struggle to tell people where I'm from, but I recently became an Icelandic citizen and have been living in Iceland this time for the last nearly 3 years. My academic background is in sustainability. I worked momentarily in international development, also as a consultant in the energy industry, which took me to places like Kazakhstan and Ghana, which was really fascinating. And I've always been involved in gender equality, but I'd say for the last 7 or 8 years have been very much focused on gender equality or diversity and inclusion. I am really excited to talk to you today, excited to hear the conversation, excited for your questions. Hopefully they're not going to be too hard. I am calling in today from a place called Húsavík, which is about 2 hours from Reykjavik in Iceland. I'm meeting my team for the first time in person. So we've come away for 2 days to meet and I've had to sneak out for an hour and a half to speak to you guys. So I'm sitting in a room in the hotel. I am a white woman wearing leopard print, which is not unusual. It's my favorite pattern. I have dark brown hair, which is parted down the center, and I'm wearing glasses, which my father tells me make me look very severe, but I like them. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you all today. So thank you.
Thank you all for the fun introductions. Got to know a little bit more about you there, and you're funny, I like it. Anyways, so to jump right into it, why are we here today? So this panel is actually the last of 3 panels we're having to highlight and map the state of diversity and inclusion in the Nordics. And this is a part of our ongoing mission to amplify the need for diversity in workplaces and society as a need to have rather than a nice to have. Later on this year, I know, August 26th, we're going to have the first ever conference gathering amazing people, actually. Every single person on this panel will be speaking at that conference in person in Oslo. So do join us if you are interested. And somebody from my organization has just shared the link. So there's my plug. And then I'm going to jump right into the conversation. So when we started this panel discussion, the first panel discussion looked at the state of diversity and inclusion in the Nordics. The second panel discussion looked at how can we include the voices of marginalized and minority groups in the conversations and in the systems and the structures or the initiatives that we create to bridge the current gaps. This conversation is looking to the need to share power. In DEI, oftentimes, perhaps if you're new to the field, you hear a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. But within DEI, we also actively look at power structures and the systems behind them. We talk about allyship, we talk about privilege. So today we're looking at really what is power and how can we share it? So this goes directly to my first question, which I will toss at Nicole. Nicole, what does it mean to you to share power? Why is it important? And how can sharing power amplify equitable DEIB initiatives? And DEIB, for those, just the acronym, you might hear it all a lot today, is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Nicole, did you catch my question? Because I just interrupted myself there. Okay,
I
great.
think so. Otherwise, you can throw it at me again. I think this is a fantastic question. And I think starting off when we ask, how can we share power? The first thing to do is to admit that status quo isn't equal. That's kind of the first thing, and that a majority of the people in power in the world are still white men. So we kind of need to look at that fact and really admit that that's the case. Because when we keep putting this topic in this CSR kind of charitable thing that we do for NICEs, we're not going to make a change. So that's kind of the first thing to do. And I have this fantastic quote that I always have when I lecture, which is, diversity is inviting people to the party, inclusivity is being asked to dance. And understanding the difference there, that just because you give someone a tiny sliver of this cake or, a little stool at the table, that's not actually sharing power. A real change has to be made. And it kind of goes in line as well with admitting that that's the case because of years and years and years of, Orientalism and colonialism, that there was a very purposeful strategy and work that was put in place to have this majority of power held by a certain type of people. When we know that, and when we kind of want and accept that that's the case, we need to kind of, okay, how are we going to do this if we could do it all again, or if we can change this entire structure? So kind of, we can't necessarily return or sack or change or remove everyone in power, but knowing that, okay, maybe there are reasons why I have this amount of power. It wasn't fair in the first place. It wasn't right in the first place. And not, doing it in a performative way. It will feel, if you are a person that's had power and you're used to it, just like with privileges, it will feel like you're giving up something. That is the case. It's like chopping off an arm that you've always used to having. But on the other side, it shouldn't be something that is served or just given to you, but it shouldn't also, from the people that are minorities or don't have the same power, shouldn't be something that you deserve. You jump through hoops to be allowed into this room. We need to basically, just scrap all the housing and start again and build this new foundation where we restructure the power. And that's kind of the approach, rather than feeling, okay, I need to give away something just to be nice. I think that mentality is very important to make that shift of how we talk about this topic and why, and facing the fact that, it isn't fair, and it was purposefully done that way 400 years ago.
Thanks, Nicole.
Deep one for that.
Thanks a lot for that, Nicole. And like what comes up for me, because I often get this question when we talk about sharing power, and people say, oh, but doesn't that mean that I have to give up something? And I guess one of the ways I like to reframe it is you don't have to give up power to share it, because there is space actually for all of us, right? But if you're historically and traditionally in a position where the power is yours and others don't have any type of power or access to this room, then that is unjust in many ways. And this leads me to my next question, actually, for Helen. In terms of, I know you work a lot with companies, and I think within DEI, and perhaps every DEI practitioner on this call understands the need to meet people, countries, companies where they are. So my question for you is, why is it important to co-create and co-define terms like diversity, equity, inclusion, power, belonging, allyship with companies or organizations that you work with?
Yeah, thanks for that. We often say that we do co-create with the businesses, or our clients, but it's not because we're kind of trying to, tailor or scrap or bend and shape what is diversity, what is equity, what is inclusion. We're very firm on that. We're very straightforward on that. We're also very straightforward, and I totally agree that there needs not to be a seat at the table, but a completely new table. It is a redefinement of the structures that is needed in order for this change transformation to go along. However, when we know a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, we don't necessarily know a lot about our clients' business strategies. We don't know necessarily a lot about their markets. Now, they can, of course, be businesses within sectors that I have worked with previously, like the oil industry and the energy business. Yes, I know those sectors and so forth, but Medico, don't know anything about Medico, don't know anything about, for example, coding industries, manufacturers of cars and so forth. So in order for these change transformations as diversity and inclusion is to work, we need to be sure that we can center it at the core of the business. And in order to center it at the core of the business, we need to understand the business. So that is why we often co-create with our clients, because they know their business, they know their strategy, they know their leadership, they know their organization and so forth. And we know diversity and inclusion. So by going in and bridging those two together, we can actually make sure that diversity is not hidden somewhere in the CSR report. That's one thing. No, this is, yes, please do. ESG track it, please do your CSR report on it. And we can also ensure that it's not just something that a poor, sorry I'm saying this, but a poor lady in HR is handling without a budget and without any colleagues to work with and spar with, but that we actually get it into C-level, that we get it into top leadership. That is something that is on the performance scorecard, or is part of the KPIs, or is part of the bonus scheme, or whatever. At the end of the day, the companies that I work with, they have this mentality where what's being measured is what's being done. So if I can get in that you need to measure your inclusion level each year, and have a target for that from a scale to 1 to 5, where 1 is bad and 5 is good. Let's go in and work with that. That is a straight up KPI. That is something that is located at your business core. And thereby we actually get to push the transformation journey. Thereby also slowly, that's the thing about the new table. It's much, much quicker and easier by just pulling up a seat, pulling up a new chair. If I want to redesign the table as I do, I have to take it more slowly, but you can do that by centering it at a co-creation level. So that's why we do it.
Thanks a lot, Helen. And I completely agree with you. One of the things I find as well in my practice is that oftentimes companies are what I call performative DEIB. So they're more concerned about that, the outward perception and how they are viewed. So even in designing and meeting companies where they are, it's also important that they design for the people that they currently have and the people that they want to attract as well, to make sure that you have that accessibility for your people, as opposed to having, you put out a fantastic, marketing thingy around DEI, and the people in your organization are like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, but it's not where I work, right? So it's also important to ensure that your house, like we say, there's a proverb, I don't know, I always ascribe everything to an African proverb. It might be African. This whole thing about charity begins at home. So if your house is not fixed, it's really difficult to fix anything outside it. But thank you for that, and absolutely agree with you. Camilla, I want to come to you from a Finnish perspective. Which sectors doing well in creating a more diverse and inclusive workplace, and what can we learn from them?
Yeah, so I can say predominantly across Nordics, those sector is the gaming sector, the IT, the tech sector is able to put in the cash, because this is simply the cash and commitment, I would say. It's simply the talent attraction deal that their raison d'etre to do diversity inclusion work. And they are actually now teaching others on open source basis. So company like Futurize is offering this diversity inclusion canvas to everyone who is interested. Inclusive, another NGO promoting inclusive workplace, has done a preliminary survey where are Finnish companies on this, and there's these 4 stats where a lot of them, there's 10% chunk on those who are beginning their diversity inclusion journey, and 10% who are super champions, companies like Nokia, Nordea, and others. But then in the middle is those two who are just fledgling in the market. So they're still figuring out their way. How do they build the diversity inclusion programs? Now, I work more with public institutions, and I've been joining Talent Boost program, which is a cross-disciplinary national program driven to attract international talent, spouses, researchers to Finland, as again, we can see demographics is changing across the Nordics and Europe, if you will. So everyone is competing equally to do the talent attraction part. And I can say that there is a lot of biases in our eyes, that public money is always badly used because of bureaucracy. And the RSA Society in London quotes this unchallenging or unachieving normal that the public projects are used for. And I've been part of one of these projects, and I can say that yes, there's a lot of money put into regional development, either through European funds or through other foundations. But what I see, the best thing is that the cities are given now the mandate, the cities are managing it, the trade unions are approaching students and spouses, international talent. So there's a lot of nice programs offered, but it's so scattered and it's very time limited. So if you have the programs, mentoring programs, you have spouse programs, you have ambassador networks like in City of Tampere, they're doing great work, which is a kind of social innovation in a way to combine the NGO work, the activist work, and the public city administration. But if it's only 2-3 year projects, it actually shoots yourself in the feet, that you cannot really continue something that works, something that's actually measured. But what I see now, there are other structural problems that cities are managing faster, and they're looking out for it. So City of Espoo, they introduced English as a service language. And it helps to people who, a majority of Finnish companies are situated there, international companies too. So they are also looking up to the challenge. At the same time, the city thinks that cities could do better, and public sector within Talent Boost, I would say that we all know that only 20 to 30% of jobs being advertised. So if you don't have that professional network, it's really hard to get into your foot in the door. And that social capital you can build through societal structures. So volunteering, you can become, be joining different networks and participate in events. And those networks, if you want to volunteer, it's hard to get into those because you need to speak Finnish or Swedish. So I did speak to NGO here locally a few years, like just before COVID, and they said, well, the NGOs really need staff. But what happens is out of 120 companies, NGOs, only 10% had something to offer to English speakers. So that means they're understaffed and they don't have enough resources to onboard these students and talents and immigrants. So it becomes a bit of a difficult change, like who needs to do what. And I believe in cross-sectoral work. There's been great programs before me that are driven by different networks, and the NGOs alone can't do the trick. So I would highlight the recognition that NGOs deserve are those community-based networks like IVOF. I think they're also nominated for the Blaze Awards. The IVOF networks, the Building Bridges, and the Turku-based, I think we have someone from Turku. There are these little mushrooms of fantastic initiatives. I just feel that the public money should give the continuous funding and to have representatives of the people who they want to attract. So combine expertise and experience of living in a multicultural society.
Thank you very much for that. And I mean, I will agree with you. I think that oftentimes people who are actually doing the work do not necessarily have the funding to amplify their work, or they don't even get the recognition or the visibility for the work that they do. And oftentimes it's organizations at the grassroots level. And yes, a lot of NGOs. And I think that is also true for Norway, and I reckon other Nordic countries here as well. So moving on to my next question for Nikolai. So one of the things that I find, I will say that granted, maybe I'm a bit biased, a Nigerian woman who's grown up in the US, who spent the past 13, 14 years circling Europe. So for me, when I see the definition of diversity, oftentimes in Norway, and I think after talking to so many people now across the Nordics, also understanding that it tends to equate gender equality. So even within that, and within just like having diversity in an organization, we often find that they are almost restricted to like entry level or associate level in organizations. So essentially, when you look at the management, C-suite, or the board, they're very homogeneous and sometimes hardly even like binary gender equality. So my question for you, Nikolai, is where does the responsibility lie to get diverse voices into decision-making positions?
Thank you for the question, Shizam. It's a good one. I would start with giving you guys some context from Norway. If we take a step back and look at the situation in too many companies in Norway, the situation is today so poor that starting talking about how to get diverse groups up and running is a challenge that must be solved after we have brought diversity in. And if we, for instance, look at the communication industry, the PR industry in Norway, we are a part of, and a number of multicultural people here to talk about dimensions. It tells us that neither the industry, the companies in the industry, the people, nor the educational institutions yet appeal to this group. So here the other day, we just for fun, we did a count of how many people that worked in 10 of the largest PR companies had like non-Norwegian sounding names, and we found that it was about 3% that could be defined as having Norwegian sounding names. And these are companies that works with influencing the Norwegian population, and which also are headquartered in Oslo, city with a population with almost 35% with an immigrant background. So it's shocking the status that we operate in. But back to the question, it was responsible for getting diverse voices into decision-making positions. And as already mentioned, I think we always have to start on the top. We have to make today's decision makers responsible, because it is the top leaders and the boards that set the course for where the company is heading towards, and because that action is it is a choice. It's not something that suddenly happens. And the top leaders and the boards, they're also the ones that can have a say about why diversity matters to the company in the first place. Is it because of the value of representation? Is it because of fairness, or is it because it's the company business critical insight? Or maybe it's a combination of. As soon as you have defined why diversity matters to your company, it suddenly makes a lot more sense to involve diverse voices in decision making and put them in decision making positions. I also think that it is the top leader's responsibility to ensure that the whole organization has what I call a generic diversity knowledge as a minimum, because when every leader from top to bottom has this diversity knowledge, it is a lot easier to know what to do when you are hiring the next leader in the department or the unit, or even and for most people to get this diversity knowledge, it requires some kind of education. But as soon as you know about things like privileges, minority stress, microaggressions, you equip yourself with valuable tools that makes it far easier to create an work environment where everyone can thrive, or a so-called inclusive workplace. That's my initial reflections on that.
Thanks, Nikolai, and it's and thanks for sharing that statistic. It is quite sobering, but it's not surprising, just in terms of when you look. It's
shocking, even if it's not shocking. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's so it's, and this is the state of affairs, and I think that oftentimes you will also find that those companies think they are diverse, you know. And I had a conversation once with somebody in, you know, a company in finance, and you know, they had unpacked diversity within a homogeneous group to, oh yeah, but they have a degree in sociology and I have a degree in philosophy. And I thought, oh wow, this is where we're at. All right, fantastic. You know, there's
I've had the same conversations as you. So it's too bad.
Yeah. Camilla, you want to add something right quick?
Yes, Nikolai, I wanted to ask you to write down those figures in the chat. It would be nice to remember those.
The percentage?
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Yeah, it'll be good to keep it. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Charlotte. Thanks for hanging in there with us. I am coming to you with questions now. You've been relaxing a bit too much. I need to get you, get your blood moving. So we've talked about, everything from what is power to how to co-create and what happens within a finished perspective. So I think we've had a lot of conversations around just I'm a quant. I love numbers. I like to measure and attach them to things. So I'm going to ask you about KPIs. I think that, within the construct of the Nordics, actually setting KPIs is quite difficult because there's this legislation around collecting demographic information. Nonetheless, question anyway, how can companies overcome the barrier to ensure that they can actually progress with their DEI initiatives or ambitions? So that's the first part. And the second, Measurable is an international company, and you have operations in a lot of different countries across different continents. How do you navigate these rules around data collection, say in the Nordics, whereas, say, for example, in North America or elsewhere, you're able to collect data? So how do you navigate this to create an effective and relevant DEI platform for your organization?
The quick answer to your second question is with difficulty. But I'll go to the first question around how can companies overcome this barrier. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I've been in this role for 15 months. It's a brandly new, can't even talk English today. It's a newly created role. And so we're still fairly early on in our journey. However, I do think it is absolutely possible to get around these things, but it's something that has to be done in a very meaningful and organized way. So you can, in countries where they have GDPR rules, you can ask people to self-select data. There's a whole bunch of considerations that need to be made. And so you need to be very clear with your people on what data are you collecting, why are you collecting it, who's going to have access to it, how is the data going to be used. You need to have a really clear and comprehensive communication strategy to the business around why you're collecting this data. It needs to have messaging from leadership. It's not something that you can kind of do on the down low and then just hope people are going to self-select data. It has to be done in a very considered way. And I'll be completely honest, we are not there yet. We are collecting data consistently globally around age and gender. And then on a country by country basis, we are collecting different types of data. So my advice to other companies in similar positions would be work out what data you have first and also work out how good the data is, and then see what you can use there. And so, as you mentioned, we're in, I think, over 30 countries in 6 continents. We're not in Antarctica yet. And so each country has different rules, sort of laws and legislation. So for example, in the US, they are required by law to collect race and ethnicity data. In Brazil and China, where we have operations, disability data is required because there are targets from the governments around that. So sort of understanding what the different rules are in the different countries. And then I mentioned, what data do you already have access to? So Nicola, I was really pleased when you mentioned about having a base level of understanding. And so that was one of my first tasks when I joined, was to, sort of help there be a common language around diversity and inclusion, because I frequently got asked in my sort of first few weeks, what is diversity and inclusion? So the task last year was training. I don't like the word training, but it was working with all the managers globally on a common understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the great thing about this session that we ran with the managers, or the sort of multiple sessions we ran, was we collected a lot of data. And much of it was qualitative, but we also got some quantitative data there. And that, however many dozens of pages of data that I got from speaking to 500 odd managers, has really informed where the company is going to go. We also have access to data through our engagement survey. We have a question around sort of belonging or meritocracy, and I can't aggregate that by many different diversity factors, but I can look at it from at a country level and gender and different business functions. So it's very much about using what you have. I can also work with local HR to understand the data they have and look at it through that perspective. So yes, there are ways around it, but I wouldn't rush into it. I think, the business needs to be ready, and you need to have a really clear, I don't think it's fair to ask people for data on various different things and then not be able to tell them what you're going to do with it. So yeah, that's my answer to the first piece. And in terms, and I think I sort of probably answered some of the second question through those comments as well. So being creative and working with what you have, and often, when you've been in the space for a while, sometimes what the outcomes of this data is going to be. I've done analysis with engagement surveys where I've been able to cut it down to some really interesting areas, and so some of the initiatives that come out of this. So you can sometimes almost reverse engineer some of these initiatives, and one example that I like to give is that I want people to come to me, and because it's a smaller organization, we're only 8,000. I suppose that's not that small, but I slowly get people to come to me, and we've been talking a lot about sharing power. I really want to impress that we don't want to We want to avoid tokenism, and we don't want to ask underrepresented groups to be doing the work around diversity and inclusion, whereas it's really the leaders that need to be driving this. But at the same time, if people want to be involved in these things, you have to create a space for them to come to you and then be in a position to give them power. And so now, a year into it, I have people contacting me, sort of trans employees who want to get involved with some of the internal initiatives. And I loved it as well, Chisholm, what you said about sort of getting your house in order. I really wanted to focus on the internal messaging and what we can do internally before we started going externally and making bold statements, because I sort of need to understand the sort of the lived experience of people in the organization before we go out externally and start talking about how wonderful we are, because we still have a lot to do.
Thanks a lot, Charlotte. So before I move on, I just wanted to note here that we have about, technically, I think 11 minutes left, but I'm going to pull 10 minutes from the Q&A. So we have about 20 minutes left. So, and I have at least one more question for each and every one of you. So I'd love if the next, we do kind of like a spitfire round and we answer quickly so I can get through it and we can get to some of the questions that we already have. So my next question goes to Helen. So in terms of, sharing power, I tend to think that, especially when you're bringing people into the room who ordinarily do not necessarily have even a foot through the door, there is a level of allyship that goes along with it. So what does allyship have to do with sharing power? And which or who, so basically looking at the groups of people that actually need to share the power. You're on mute, Helen.
Jesus Christ, the muting, the Zooms, the COVID, come on. Okay, I'm ramping out of it. Okay, back here. So I think before answering the question, I think one thing we have to be really, really clear on is that power and allyship and also privileges as such shift depending on context. There is a massive difference in what drives power just from Copenhagen to when I go to Berlin in Germany, to when I go to New York in the US, to when I go to Bangkok in Thailand. How power, how privileges play out in those area of operations or those contexts or cultures are different. It's based on historical developments, cultural development, technological developments, and so forth. And I can hold a lot of privilege in one situation where I need to be an ally towards those who do not hold a lot of privilege in that situation. And then I can be in other cultures or other contexts where I do not have a lot of privilege. So first of all, also as Nikolai was stating in the beginning, what is the ground elements of this? What does it actually mean? As also Nicole said, what is your own mentality towards this? What's your own self-awareness? Do you know your own privileges? Do you know how those privileges play out in the culture in which you're doing business or where you're working or whatever? As a white woman in Denmark with a master's degree from Copenhagen Business School, living on the right side of the tracks, aka the nice zip code and so forth in Copenhagen, I have an immense amount of privileges. However, if you take some of my other diversity intersections, I lose a lot of privileges, aka lose a lot of power. So that's one thing. So just that basic self-awareness and understanding that this is something that shifts. And sometimes you will be in a position of power and thereby needing to be an ally. And sometimes you will be the minority. And it depends on the diversity parameters or the diversity intersections and the culture. However, when we talk about allyship, and just so that everybody understands, we define it as the ability to take on the minority struggles as one's own. So if you want to be, for example, an LGBTQ ally, try to educate yourself on why Stonewall is important. That's one thing. So what is your own awareness around that? Do you even know what Stonewall is? If you don't know what Stonewall is, don't go around saying you're an LGBTQ ally. Secondly, pass the bloody mic. Again, I'm sitting here as a white lady, privileged, out of this room. I shouldn't be having the microphone. You can even say something like that. So pass the mic, hear from somebody else. There's a reason why we were born with 2 ears and 1 mouth. It is because as a human being, you should be able to listen more to the lived experiences and learn from them. And then to your question about who needs to be withdrawn from the mic, so to say? Nobody. The thing about diversity and inclusion is that everybody has the right to make mistakes, because everybody will make mistakes, and I make mistakes also. And we have to enter into this discussion that everybody has the right to make mistakes, because only from there on out does everybody have the right to learn, to educate, to become more aware, to progress, to transform, and so forth. So again, it goes back to, instead of viewing power as something that is negative and that is holding, try to view power as something that is proactive and that can actually push another conversation. So share the space, share the microphone, and so forth, pass it along. But it goes back to you being self-aware enough on where do you hold power in which situations and where don't you? And how can you recognize that with others?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for that. So I'll move on to the next question now for Nicole. And it basically kind of looks around belonging, which we haven't touched on much. And we all know that belonging is important to inclusion and creating spaces where people can wield power that is leveraged on equity. But a lot of companies still struggle to measure belonging. So essentially, what are some key indicators to consider when measuring belonging?
I think this is a really good, oh, sorry. My sound.
Again, the Zoom, the pandemic, the COVID, the everything. It's like, can we please? At least we're meeting physically in Oslo in August.
Now.
There we go.
Is there an echo? Yeah, cool. No, there is a bit of an echo. Trying to completely mute. Okay. I can't hear you guys now, but I'll do some talking and Shizam, you'll have to point at me. Yeah, apologies. My sound is just working on my computer, so I had to log in on my phone. But I think this is a really, really good question. And I think we do need to talk about belonging more. And the first kind of indicator where we jump to kind of measuring belonging, but we need to ask ourselves, what is belonging and for whom? Whose perspective are we looking at when we talk about belonging? And I might have a partner or company going, we measured belonging and everyone's super happy. Like they feel great here. And it's like, cool, but everyone is white and male. Of course they're gonna feel like they belong. So it's kind of also looking again at where are we now, whom are we asking, and what perspective is the belonging in relation to? So really starting off there and kind of not just go, oh, everyone feels belonging, yeah, because it isn't a different context for them. And also being able to kind of allow for these various perspectives and contexts to live together, and creating that type of foundation when we look at having an inclusive workforce. But I also think that belonging goes in line with, succession planning and what opportunities you have, seeing that there is a path for you. That also goes in line with feeling that you do belong and that you want to stay. So again, I mean, so many of you, everyone has very, very much touched on the importance of getting, recruitment right and the talent in, but also making sure there is a clear way or ladder, and also that, again, you can't be what you can't see. And even though, let's say someone recruits people all on entry level, if there's no one in management, you don't feel 100% that this is the place for you, because where's the space for me in my next step? So being able to really realize that belonging comes from very different contexts and perspectives, and that's what we need to account for, and having that very much all the way.
Thanks, Nicole. Thank you. And can you hear me? Okay. And one of the things, I just want to add something as well to this, because oftentimes, a lot of companies now, in terms of like trying to assess a baseline for where they have or inclusion, or the feeling of inclusion and belonging within the organization, they tend to do this surveys. And oftentimes, I hear people say, oh, 93% of the company or the team they're happy, so we're doing a great job. And I'm just like, absolutely not. That 7% that is not happy, that's where the work is, that's where the inclusion is. And more than likely, when you look at them, you find that they're the minority groups. So just further nuancing what Nicole said, if everyone is alike and the systems and structures are built for them, of course they're happy. But when you have even 1% of people within your survey who think things can be better, then you have a lot of work to do. Things can absolutely be better. But I'm going to move on because we don't have a lot of time left. I'm going to move on now to Camilla. And my question for you is, I think that so far what I've learned about Norway and Finland, that there are similarities in companies actively seeking international talent, so they will import them, as opposed to using the diverse talents within the country. So the diverse talents within the country are often overlooked. So my question for you is, why do you think that this is even a thing, right? And does that speak to the unconscious bias that companies hold that say their local diverse populace is not skilled enough, for example, because they are viewed as immigrants, whereas the imports are expats? You're on mute as well, Camilla.
Hello there. Yes, it's a complicated matter, so not everything is so documented why they receive from outside, because even to get people from outside today, there is a lot of technical barriers to getting those paperwork done. So what I see, yes, in Helsinki region, there's 10,000 unemployed, highly educated professionals. And still there is a huge, massive investment promotion and talent recruitment initiatives taking place. I mean, this has to happen on one side. On the second side, there is just that is unconscious bias awareness, that unawareness that there are local people who need help in professional networks, but because they are so tightly knit communities, it's hard to get the foot in the door. That's why I'm saying that social capital is all we need to do, but it's not personal responsibility, but it's also using the NGOs and different sectors to kind of go in and sponsor something that works. So that's where, I mean, the corporate companies, the small, middle-sized companies, they can also become an activist in that sense and support the initiatives that may have started publicly, but they just need to keep on doing it. And that's why I promote themselves as an employer. I want to tell you a story right now. This morning, I've trained job professionals that work in a public sector. So in Denmark is like job centers, and I don't know if they have similar in Sweden and Iceland and Norway. And they said that because of the war in Ukraine, there came a huge interest from Finnish employers to hire in Ukrainian professionals. And they did the recruitment fairs. And the surprise was that there were more employers lined up than there were job seekers. And in that region, and I had like representatives from across Finland, so there is differences of the talent quality and what are their competencies. So that in that place in Finland, they had mostly students and wives and mothers and elderly who were not really fit for work in that field. Whereas in south of Finland, so Uusimaa, where we are located, capital region, they had problems with Ukrainians accepting, or internationals accepting, the job offer by the employers. So that raises a question. So, okay, if you're so open and empathic towards Ukrainian refugees, how do we channel that empathy towards people of other descent, towards people with disabilities, I mean, different gender identities, and so forth? And for sure, there needed to be more discussion in terms of like, okay, who's going to call out on this? So luckily, after the Black Lives Matter, there was a wave of nice discussions on Finnish LinkedIn, and there has been great calling outs of, like somebody just opened a bottle and just the genie came out and said, Finnish HR professionals started calling out their own colleagues and say, not in our name, you're going to be unconsciously biasing talents. We are all equal, and it's beyond putting your logo into rainbow colors. So I think that sense, for me, I see in Finland, there needs to be more bridge building to who gets hired, what are the recruitment practices, how do companies come in and really do their real honest feedback on, work on their diversity inclusion, and 3, what is the top leadership commitment? So I want to acknowledge Nikolai's work that board leadership has to be diverse in order that has to be trickled down, that commitment. So.
Thanks a lot. And I mean, so many truth bombs in there. So thank you. And I think that one of the things we also have to acknowledge is that a lot of things can coexist. You know, we can applaud companies for welcoming with open arms and trying to give opportunities to Ukrainian refugees. And at the same time, call BS on the reality that it has a huge sense of performative, you know, inclusion, because there are all these other people in this country who have been actively seeking work, but they've not been included. And those two things can absolutely coexist. So thank you for nuancing that and calling that out. I'm going to move on to Nikolai. We have 6 minutes left. So I know a little bit about VRS because we like you. You're a great company here in Oslo, in Norway, also doing important work. So I guess my question for you is that you often talk about that with your work at VRS, that you focus on the correction of prejudice and underrepresentation. So what does this actually mean within the context of your DEI work? And how long does it take to correct prejudice?
All right, I will just start off with the first question, and then let's see how much time is left. So when we say that we work with correcting prejudice and underrepresentation, it's a bold and big statement, but I guess it's also true. And I would like to give you an example of how we work. One of our projects that we did for the health authorities in Norway back in February 2021. The job was to reduce the infection rates in the immigrant population, because some groups in the immigrant population, they had a higher infection rate than other parts of the nation. So what we did a lot of things, but one of the clever moves we did in order to spread information to stop this infection spread was to use micro-influencers in the distribution of the information. And a micro-influencer is a highly trusted people in a certain micro-society. It could typically be a 23-year-old nurse with Somali background. It could be the local trainer, or it could be some kind of leader, or even the imam in the mosque. They are people that are highly trusted in their micro-society, and people tend to listen to what they say. And during the pandemic, we used these micro-influencers to make their recommendations, the rules, and the advice more understandable for for the groups in the population that didn't understand all these rules, regulations, and recommendations. And they could even get the recommendations in the first language if needed. And the micro-influencers, they were used as cultural translators, because some rules, they were hard to understand even for me. And we know that also some immigrants group, they have a hard time trusting the government. They are not used to having a government that wants them well. So that we could use a cult or a micro influencers to inform them, it gave the message a lot more trust, and then they will listen to. So when you understand, the point I try to make is that when you understand existing cultural barriers, when you're able to speak the same language, and if you even look like the target group that you're trying to communicate with, you have a big advantage whether you want to inform them, or if you want to sell them something, or if you want to get the real honest opinion about something. And this campaign actually led to reduction in spread of the infection. And it also proved that the immigrant groups, they took responsibility and they were accused of not caring too much about this. But during this campaign, they also proved that they did guilty and actually cared. So the majority's population's perception about the immigrant groups, the change as a result of this. And even if we didn't fix like the whole polarization of the society, obviously not, we reduced the friction in a critical situation between the immigrant groups and the majority population. Absolutely.
If I could jump in, just because for time, and I completely do agree with the way you've done this, and I think it also feeds into what Nicole had said earlier about you can't be what you can't see. It's easier for me to receive something better when I see somebody who looks like me in it. It's like easier for me to aspire to be a part of a company if I see somebody like me in leadership role, right? So I think it's, and you all did a fantastic job with that. So thank you. I'm going to move on now to Charlotte for the final question. So I want to talk to you about, I think, essentially kind of where I found DEI in the Nordics quite shocking, which is around binary and homogeneous gender equality, right? And I think this is more or less the same in every Nordic country in terms of how they view conversations around DEI. It's like, oh, gender equality. So why do you think this is, and how can we push the conversation further to include more intersectionalities? So if you can give us a pretty quick answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think gender equality without intersectionality is not equality, and people seem to forget this. And why is it like this in the Nordics? I have the advantage of having lived in lots of other countries before living in Iceland. I've also lived in Denmark and Norway. Iceland is number one when it comes to gender equality, but it is not a utopia for women by any stretch of the imagination. I sometimes think if you come first in these tables, it leads to complacency. And so I think the Nordics have this reputation around the world of being these amazing gender utopias, and all of us sitting here today know that is not the case. I do think this "we've solved gender equality" attitude sometimes stops us from looking beyond gender and diversity. You know, Nikolai, you spoke about a great example to do with other populations. It's this, you know, it's the same in Iceland. We now have 17% of people who are not Icelandic born. So that's 17% of people who should be engaged in the workforce, and they're not. If you look at big organizations, we're doing, I think, Camilla, you were talking about it, we're bringing people in from overseas, but we're not looking to our own immigrant populations. So I think there's a hesitance and a discomfort around having conversations. In Iceland, I feel like the conversation slowly is starting around race and ethnicity. But when I've pushed people on this in the past, they say, well, we're not a very diverse, you know, we're not a racially diverse society. And you really need to hold up a mirror and say, no, you are, and you are increasingly. And if you're not engaging these people, we're going to see issues that other Nordic countries have been facing. So I think there is a lack of knowledge. Yes, I'd say sort of, I know we have no time, but I'd say complacency is one of the reasons. There's a hesitance because of discomfort around the facts, and there's just a lack of knowledge and a lack of data. So we need people to understand the power of diversity and understand that people coming from, whether it's the Ukraine or Syria or Yemen, these people have skills. And Iceland is tiny. I don't know if anyone else is from Iceland. We're 360,000 people. We need diversity to come into the country. It will make our businesses better. I could talk about this for a long time. You know this, Chisholm, but I'm mindful of time.
Yes, thank you so much. And I completely agree with you. And I think there's also just this need to move beyond the binary gender. The world is now made up of men and women, a bunch of people in between that we don't acknowledge and we don't regard. And it's absolutely ridiculous. So thank you for that, Charlotte. Camilla, you want to say something? You're on mute.
Yes, I also wanted to add that there are different ways to tackle this. In Copenhagen, I know, I think, Nikolai, I think to you, the difference at immigrant population, hidden problems are also things like negative social control. And there you need to work together from the public authorities, the police, and like really going across sectors to find out why are some population in the country is not represented in the labor market. And then they notice that a lot of women don't get allowed to go to job center without a male person, a relative. So the negative social control is like really internal structures, which we don't even hear about, then using artists and using academia to explain the intersectionality challenges and opportunities, and how it's good for product development, how it's good for human rights perspective, and how it's good just for, good corporate citizenship and social sustainability. So I think we can't always fix it as consultants here, but having the artists showcasing through media, then it goes on with the, what did I mention the other? I lost one stakeholder, that it has to be really asking, who are we not asking from? Because there's nothing like this inclusive design to promote this intersectionality. I think many people don't still know what it is, because they just say, oh, it's academic something. So building more awareness on these topics in simple language would help a lot.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite phrase, and I guess everyone in my team is probably tired of hearing me say it, is everyone in the room. And I think one of the ways to navigate some of what you mentioned, say with social control or whatever it is that who is actually in the room when those projects and initiatives are being designed. It's one thing to, of course, it's not going to work if you don't include me, if it's made for me, but I'm not included in the process. Because if somebody like me was included in the process, they will say, maybe this is not the way this will work. Maybe try this instead. So it's always just nuancing. And ultimately that also comes back, at least in my belief, to like the leadership is, who are you including when you're designing, solutions for people? So yes, completely agree with you. And also where that responsibility lies is in the design from, the foundation. I want to go straight to the questions because we have a couple and we have a few minutes, 15 minutes left. If I could just ask very quickly we like to end this part with like asking people or panelists, like, what are your top tips? In this case, I asked for one specific tip, one phrase would be fantastic for people who want to share power or amplify visibility for minority groups. Like, what is your top tip, Nikolai?
Here we go. So my top tip for every individual, even if you're define yourself as a colleague, a member of the society, or a leader, is to educate yourself about diversity, because we should know what we know and what we don't know about each other. That will make it so much easier to hang out together, work as a unit, and it will also easier to formulate relevant and respectful questions about each other, because we are curious and also find all the similarities that we have with people that don't look like ourselves or live the same lives as we do.
Thanks, Nikolai. Camilla?
Well, I believe the future is social, and in order for it to be inclusive, you start with your own inclusivity, so someone else includes you elsewhere.
Thank you. Helen? You're still on mute.
God. The mirror. Take it. It goes also to what Camilla and Nikolai were saying. Take a look in it. Get to know your own privileges, your own self-awareness. Expand on that. Where do you hold power in society? Where don't you? Why? And what is going on there? So start with yourself. It all starts in the mirror.
Thank you. Charlotte?
Be prepared to have difficult conversations. I think we live in a society that is becoming increasingly binary, and a lot of the DEIB space is very grey, and people want black or white. So be comfortable in the grey.
Thank you. Nicole?
Making sure the sound doesn't go crazy on me again. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. We will make them. Trying to be perfect this, or being harsh on yourself that you did or said something back in the day or even now, that's not going to be helpful. So accept, don't aim for perfection, and just be humble. We know what we know, we come in with what we have, but we're trying to improve. That's the best and most important kind of tool to have. You will make a mistake. It's okay. It's how you pick yourself up and learn and do better in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you all so very much. Really great tips. So I'm going to move on to some of the questions we have here. I see that some have been answered. So the next question here is from Kim, and it says, what exactly is this power you speak about? Can you give an example? Who wants to take this one? Nicole, you're smiling. No, you can't speak? Okay, Charlotte.
I think people can interpret power in different ways, but to me, it's giving people the voice, and it's giving them access to where decisions are made, and listening to them. So it's not tokenism. It's giving them a seat at the table, listening to them, and then actioning what they're saying.
Thank you, Helen.
Think about it this way as a practical example, because power takes, Jesus Christ, it's an academic term that takes how many lectures to unfold also. But when you make a decision and you're in a meeting, was there an agenda, first of all, for that meeting where that decision were to be made? Was that agenda sent out in good time so everybody had the opportunity to prepare? Who's invited for the meeting? Who's part of the decision? Who's the key stakeholders? Somebody who knows something about the subject that we need to decide on, or just the regular usual suspects in the organization because they are either VPs or senior directors? Secondly, what goes on in the meeting? Who has the right to the microphone? Who has the right to speak? Whose voice is heard? Whose voices are amplified? Which voices are shut down? And when does the decision actually when is the decision actually made? Is it made in that formal meeting with the right stakeholders and the agenda and everything? Or is it what happens when two people who know each other really, really well goes outside to the coffee machine after the formal meeting and then say, hey, shouldn't we do it this way? That's power. It's a micro example of how power actually plays out in a working environment or in an organization. And when we exclude minorities, for example, because of biases, or people who don't look like ourselves from these decisions because of habits, because of unconscious bias, because of plain out simple discrimination, racism, sexism, homophobia, call it what you want, we not only discriminate against people, we also make really, really bad decisions. So power is something that goes on every day.
Absolutely. And I also think about power and privilege as things that are quite fluid. You know, you can walk into one room, you have power, you can walk into the next, you don't have power or privilege. And I think also we have a responsibility to understand our power. We have a responsibility to understand our privileges, and then that way we can better wield it in allyship. I'm going to move on to the next question by Nikki. Is legislative change the answer to the barriers that DEIB progress face in the Nordics? And if so, what steps needs to be taken to achieve this change? So essentially, do we need better legislative policies? Who wants to take this?
I can start quickly on this one. So let's start by saying that right now is May month, is your EU diversity month, where it's European Commission calling out companies and organizations to build in inclusive workplaces and launch initiatives. There's a lot of the legislation happening, but it's not followed up upon because every country, it gets into a problem with immigration directive and internal affairs of every country. So I would encourage more companies to, realize that it's not just legislation, but also their own will to be competitive in the, in the future, post-COVID, post-digital world. Unfortunately, I have to say it that many times I train people to hire international talents, and HR professionals are the barrier to diversity inclusion, because they're the poor people need to manage everything. So in that sense, you need to have incentivized DEIB program that it's not on the shoulders of HR, but on a company perspective where the people first policy will actually support the long-lasting company strategies contra the very sometimes vulnerable policy change, because we see what's happening. Even if Denmark and Finland wants equally international talents, the Danish legislation hasn't agreed how many foreign talent they want to bring, how much money they have to pay. So they will always be the bottlenecks on policies, and that's why the cultural change is much more, the cooperation between stakeholders will create more lasting change rather than it comes through vulnerable policies.
Thank you for that. I have another question here. Well, I have a question here from Anders, and good question. Does allyship actually work, or is active allyship better? And what does it mean? Who wants to take this? Nicole, can you speak now? No? Okay, Helen, sorry, I keep butchering your name.
Okay, Helene, I think actually.
Helene, okay.
At least I'm not muted right now. Yeah, it works, but it's really, really hard.
Which part of it? Is it allyship or active allyship? Can you nuance the difference between the two?
I wouldn't nuance it them. That's one thing I don't really understand, because you can't be an ally if you're not active in your allyship. So you can't really nuance it. Sitting around saying, yeah, I'm an ally, but then you don't call out situations where you see sexism or racism, then you're not an ally. And that's also the hard thing about it. It's because you have to actively engage in those conversations all the time. And that's also the conversation came up earlier. This is really, really hard. This can be uncomfortable work. This is difficult. This is in the gray area and so forth. But I wouldn't distinguish the two. That's one thing. And secondly, I think that sometimes allyships fail because we don't recognize how hard it can actually be. I just think about it in the other way. If you're not an ally, if you're not in those tough conversations, if you're not in those difficult conversations, think about being the minority in the room who has to live through them every single day without anybody making sure that the space is more inclusive for them. So, yeah.
Sorry, go on. Did you?
No.
Yeah?
I'm finishing off my rant and muting now.
Thank you. Charlotte, you wanted to add something here?
No, I think Helene covered it really well. I don't believe that there is allyship without being active, and there is a scale of allyship, and we all have to start somewhere, but you need to be constantly educating yourself. You need to be educating others, and you need to be putting yourself in positions where you are stepping in where something bad is happening. And then, sort of the ultimate is where you're putting forward initiatives and you're running with them. So yes, there is a scale, but all of it is active.
I listened to a podcast by Dr. Yaba Vale, and I think she did a fantastic nuance that I absolutely love. And she said there's a need to move away from allyship to accomplice, right? Because oftentimes, you can be an ally and I can come to you and say, oh my gosh, that man was sexist, or that person said something racist. Then you can say, oh, what can I do? And you can be furious with me, right? But being an accomplice is, like, let's get in the car, let's go find somebody, let's go break something, right? You're willing, you have a mate in the game, you're actively engaged and willing to lose whatever it is. So I think as well, perhaps for those listening, I think for us, we understand the need that, like, allyship is not just showing up and listening to something and like, okay. Allyship is actually speaking up and, saying something, even when you might lose something.
And being willing to relinquish some of your power.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm just trying to catch up here with any other questions that we might have. Nicole, can you speak now, or are you still muted? Yeah, okay. So we have a lot of great comments here. I think we have a question. 1 second, I see this. So we have, there's no such thing as, let's see. Okay. We have a question from Santani. Is power privilege? No, sorry, there's a question before that. It says, how do you involve everyone in DEIB conversations and progress, particularly those who aren't as engaged, aware, or directly disadvantaged by it? So perhaps one person can answer this and we can move on.
I can try this one. Okay. I think that talking about D&I and involve everyone should be like more of a duty, not something that you can choose. It should be like, whether you talk about GDPR or other standards, you cannot just say, no, I'm not interested in this. And I think that me as a white male, it's the same thinking behind using the micro-influencers. If I speak with another male, maybe, I'm not sure, but maybe what I say will have a bigger effect on the receiver of my opinion. If you compare it to a black male saying the same thing. So I think the role that we white males has in the D&I work, where we work, is crucial to make a great success.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for that, Nicole, and I completely agree with you. We have other questions here, but we're not able to get to them as we are coming up on time, and I want to respect everyone's time. So I just want to say thank you very much, you all, for being here. I really appreciate your time and your insights, for sharing. For those joining us on Zoom and on LinkedIn, also very much appreciate your time. So Nikolai, Camilla, Helen, Charlotte, and Nicole, thank you so very much. And I can't wait to meet you all in person in August. So thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.